The only time I've ever been attacked was by liberal women. I find that liberals are some of the most intolerant people. One of my friends got punched in the face at UC Berkeley just because he was tabling with a conservative organization. You see this happening all the time.
And vice versa.
And vice versa.
And vice versa.
I've
People
never
die for being people of color all the
people of
time.
color die.
Like, not punched in the face, but like dead.
So I'm Dee Nasty. I'm a comedian and a host here for Vice as well. So the word feminism, it affects people differently. This is why we wanted to have an eclectic group of women, both on the progressive side and the conservative side, to discuss feminism and what that means to you. So,
I have a quick question. Are you allowed to cuss?
pardon me?
Are you allowed to cuss?
You can.
It's very important. That just frees it up, you know?
You can.
before.
All right, so by a show of hands, who here identifies as a feminist? Okay, cool. I'm just gonna go by and I'm gonna ask everyone, what does feminism mean to you and why do you or don't you identify as a feminist? So Ariel, we can start with you.
I wouldn't identify as a modern feminist because I don't really feel any affinity for third wave feminism any way, shape, or form, but I support social and legal equality for men and women. And so I think that I think the term feminism has been co-opted by the left in some pernicious ways. So I'd like to identify as a feminist, but I'm not sure in the current vernacular that's really possible.
Got it. Blair, what do you identify as?
I definitely identify as a feminist, though I do agree that there has been, kind of a fraught history of feminism, particularly when you look at women's liberation. You often see people cite like 1920 as the year when women got the right to vote, but Native American women didn't have citizenship until 1924, much less the ability to vote until the Voting Rights Act was passed in, 65. So it's definitely a fraught term, but I think presently there's a lot of great feminist discourse where I do feel comfortable with the term, but it's not like my one axis.
Got it. Kate?
Yeah, I identify as a feminist, but I'm from a region in Texas where people are like, I'm a feminist and all my guns are pink. And I don't quite think that's feminism, but I agree that it's a constantly evolving word that should hopefully become more inclusive.
Loren?
So I don't know, I think that the term feminism has been corrupted by people on the far left. I think that we can all agree that everyone wants equality of the sexes.
So you don't identify as a feminist?
It depends like what you define a feminist. If we're talking about like previously mentioned equal rights, then of course I don't think there's a single person who would not want equal rights between the sexes. But if we're talking about feminism today, where it's become so radicalized, then I don't want to be associated with that movement.
Yeah, so I'm definitely a feminist. I'm a libertarian feminist, which a lot of people think that there's a disjunct between libertarianism and feminism, but I actually think that they have the same goals. It's basically about getting the state out of people's lives and allowing them to live whatever life path is best for them as an individual, regardless of their sex or gender.
Snaps for that.
Deja?
I identify as a feminist. It was the lens through which I first started to explore my identity. And more than that, my identity is as a young person, a woman of color, someone who experienced homelessness and poverty. And I think feminism is what you make it. And for me, it's very individualized. It's something that I've explored and is always growing for me.
Thank you. Simon?
I don't consider myself a feminist. Just the modern day feminist movement, I don't agree with it a lot.
Thank you. Destiny?
So I am a pro-life feminist, which I guess is something that has to be said these days since it's become so synonymous with abortion rights. But I'm a feminist because I believe in equality for women and that through our rights and liberations, we have a job to stand up for the weaker and more vulnerable and more marginalized, everybody in the human family who would fall under that category, which also includes unborn women and men.
Thank you. Nala?
Yes, I actually struggle with identifying as a feminist for a lot of different reasons. And when I think about my intersecting identities as it pertains to being Black, as it pertains to being also trans, as it pertains to this movement, I struggle with saying, oh, I'm a feminist, but also support women's rights at the same time. So it's something that I sit with. Where do I fall in as it pertains to moving? I know the issues that I want to talk about, so I lean more towards the issues versus saying that I quickly identify historically knowing how feminists as a movement is moving currently.
Got it. Is the term feminist inclusive of all women?
No.
Why not?
I think that as a Jewish woman, it's very exclusive towards Jewish women. You know, when I was at the Women's March, you know, the leaders of the Women's March are known to be very anti-Semitic, and I just don't feel as a Jewish woman or as a conservative woman that I belong in the feminist movement.
Ariel, and then
I was just going to second what Lauren said in terms of being exclusionary for Jewish women in particular. I think it was really egregious the way in which it took so long for people, especially on the left, to actually condemn or distance themselves from the Women's March. And I think there are other people on this panel who could probably speak as well to the fact that if you are pro-life, as I myself am, there is also no space for you in modern feminism. You know, the tent of modern feminism does not include Jewish women, it does not include conservative women, and it certainly does not include pro-life women.
I actually disagree. I think that I understand certainly why a lot of people feel isolated from the modern feminist movement, because I think that there are a lot of outspoken people who have sort of tried to narrow down what it means to be feminist. I actually think that anybody of any gender can be a feminist as long as they believe that people should be equal and should be treated equally regardless of what their sex or gender is.
As somebody who gets told on a daily basis that I'm not a feminist because of my pro-life views, I think it's really easy to say, well, like, okay, you won't let me sit at your table, but fuck it, I'm gonna sit where I want. And I think that that's kind of the beauty of feminism, right? It is this radical movement that says you are supposed to be rebellious, and if people aren't gonna create space for you, then you take space for yourself.
so if you're not a feminist, are you against women?
No.
Okay, cool.
I mean, unless you're against women.
Yeah, exactly. I think you can be against women and not a feminist.
It's like squares and
But I don't think that just identifying as not a feminist means that you're against women, because I think that a lot of people just identify against what they see as what feminism is, and not necessarily the actual idea of feminism as this larger conceptual idea.
And I think, too, you can be a feminist and still be against women. Just because you subscribe to a label doesn't mean that you're, like, peachy.
My next question, similar to a question I asked before, but now I'm changing it up. Are feminists anti-men?
Some are.
Yeah, sure. I think there are some. I do think that there are some people who view feminism as anti-men, and I think there is a smaller number of people who consider themselves feminists and are anti-men.
And I think, too, there's a conflation of patriarchy and men.
Yes.
And so people, like, you know, feminism is anti-patriarchy, right? And like, because there's so many systems that are against women, it's a fear that, like, we're gonna reduplicate it, you know, like this idea of black power being anti-white. It's like, no, it's just pro-black, you know, like, chill out. But just this fear that it's going to challenge the status quo in a negative way. But there are some very outspoken feminists who are anti-men and for, like, various reasons, and they exist. But to characterize the whole group as that, or that as being negative, you know, is a whole other thing.
I also think that men are like really valuable allies in this movement because they hold a lot of power and privilege, and like they should be leveraging it to help put us at the front, to help us amplify our voices and our stories. And that's what solidarity looks like. Seeing their success, their well-being is tied to my own is really important, and I want to work them in, and I want to leverage their privilege to help amplify all of our voices, right?
And I like that you brought up the idea of patriarchy, because I think that people view patriarchy as men, like all men are in positions of power, et cetera. And that's not true. It's about this certain view of how society should function that in many ways hurts men as well,
like
right?
this idea that you have to be like ultra fit, ultra masculine, you have to provide, that you can't have any mental health issues, that you have to be straight, that you have to be just kind of in this box. It's very harmful for people because like that is not how the mass majority of people have functioned in human history.
I just also want to push back on the idea that, you know, we live in a society that's necessarily dominated by men, because if you actually look at educational achievement and attainment in this country, women are the ones that are getting the vast majority of bachelor's degrees. Advanced higher education is now dominated by women. So when we say, you know, we live in a society where men are dominating it, I'd actually say there's a lot of evidence out there that is suggesting that women are actually outpacing men, and especially in terms of earnings and all sorts of other things. So I think we can have a longer conversation about that as well. I'd be happy to, but I do think that there is, you know, this attitude that, you know, women are being, you know, oppressed by men. I think there's a lot to suggest out there, especially Christine Hoff Sommers has done quite a bit of data on this, that suggests that men are falling behind, especially when it comes to educational attainment. So I think that we have to be careful about the words we use when we say that it's a male-dominated society, because I think women are dominating in a lot of different ways, and I'm happy to see women succeed.
Question. I just want to know, we're talking about the past and all of this stuff. I just want to know how we're going to fix it, how we're going to get past it and move forward instead of just being stuck on the past.
Well, I
By
think that,
talking about it.
Yeah, well, I think that part of what empowers people to change the present is knowing what was structurally against them in the past, right? So
I'm
if,
just
like,
tired of talking. If we want to, make progress and do better and get women working, and stop, single moms from being poor and stuff, what are the programs? How we going to reach out? How we going to fix it?
What would be
Because
one
talking
idea
is
that
really
you
not
would
doing
like?
nothing.
You say you don't identify as a feminist, and you just want to see the action. You want to leave the past.
Yeah, I'm
in the
about
past.
action. I'm not about just keep talking and just talking and talking. I want programs. Let's go to the White House. Let's go to the government. Let's go out here. Let's go vote. Let's make sure that our representatives are doing what they're supposed to be doing. Let's get back to the neighborhood. You know what I'm saying? Come together, make our own programs. You get what I'm saying? I'm all about that stuff. I'm not about just sitting down talking. I'm about action.
In America today, do you feel that women still need to fight for equality?
Yes.
Why?
Just look at the GOP. I mean, where's the representation? I think that's the thing, coming from Texas, being surrounded by a lot of conservatives, and knowing representation is important, knowing that people don't know what they don't know, and if there's not a female voice there, or a woman of color, or a trans person to bring these issues up to the table, it's not going to get dealt with. There's not going to be any type of solutions or policies or programs that go into play. And I'm at the point now where I don't think the government's the end-all be-all. I think it's time we have to save ourselves. And so I think that that's kind of what we have to come back to, is grassroots activism and being the help that our communities need, because we see the need. They're very visible to us. They're not visible in politics at this point, at least not on the right.
Even though there was like this there was this awakening on the Democrat side in terms of having more women, I wouldn't say that a lot of the women that came into the Democratic Party or were representing the Democrats were not women that I felt like I could really connect with. For me, at least, if it's a man or a woman, if it's the ideology that I can align with, I don't necessarily need a woman to feel represented.
So are there not quality Republican women then?
There definitely are, but my point is that there is definitely like a messaging and imaging problem within the GOP. I'm not disputing that, but I vote based on whatever ideas I think are being put forth that I think are the best, whether it's a man or a woman putting them forth.
So I'm going to move on. We're already on the topic of the government and just everything that's going on. So I'm going to move on with a couple questions here. But by a show of hands, who here voted for Trump?
I don't publicize my votes, actually.
So does anyone have questions for the women here that voted for Trump?
Why?
Okay, the reason why I voted for Trump is because I actually was a fellow for the Democratic Party. And so I just really did not like Hillary Clinton. I actually also did a lot of community work for Bernie Sanders as well. And I don't know, I literally sat in the voting booth for it was a long time. And I don't know, I just checked the box. Honestly, I honestly didn't even think he was gonna win. So part of it was a kind of a joke. But again, I don't know, but will I vote for
want to speak to the privilege that holds for that election to be a joke for you, right?
Well, it wasn't really a joke. I was like,
you just said it.
Well, let me recant what I meant by a joke. I didn't like either party. I think it was if Bernie Sanders was on the ticket, I would have voted for Bernie Sanders, because I really did at the time really love what he stood for, because he really did a lot of grassroots, and I related to him as a Jewish American, and I thought that socialism was the answer. And then but then what happened with Hillary Clinton when she stole the election from him, I just couldn't vote for her just because she was a woman. So I did vote for Trump.
Why
but
not write in?
Because that's wasting a vote.
But it was a joke.
But it was a joke vote, so.
Okay, well, me, I support Trump simply because he's a businessman, and I come from a business family. I was raised, my dad was a single dad. He owned his own business. So, who wouldn't want to vote for Trump? He's a businessman. He's a whole billionaire.
It was handed to him
He's
by
an
his father.
entire billionaire. Just because his dad gave him $1 million afterwards, what does that mean? You have to keep up with that. How you build from that 1 million?
I personally feel like
and he got that 1 million. He went all the way into debt, almost into $1 billion debt. Came up out of that. and have been successful ever since. And I mean, and me, I'm not a person that just sit there and watches one news channel. I go out and I go to the Women's March. I go and I talk to everybody. I see both sides. I'm not a one-sided person. I would never be that, because once you're a one-sided person, then they can easily eat you alive, period.
Do you consider yourself a Republican?
No, I'm a conservative.
But you like Trump, yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I didn't vote for Hillary Clinton or for Donald Trump. Honestly, it's something that I thought on a lot because, you know, it was really important to me. I know that one vote doesn't matter that much, but the ideas behind the vote, I think, do matter. And for me, I tried it, I weighed them on everything, and I just kept coming up where they were just equally bad. These were the two least popular presidential candidates of American history, period, both of them, right?
And I'm gonna like recant my statement. You know, it was like a really hard election because, you know, it was like my first time voting. And again, you know, I thought that Donald Trump was a really he didn't represent me. And do I regret my decision? I'm not gonna divulge in that. But again, I think that voting is important. And when I said it was a joke, I think that was kind of an inappropriate thing to say.
Okay. Also, I was never going to vote for Hillary, period. First of all, she upset me because she over there, she comes on a black radio station talking about I got hot sauce in my bag, like girl boo. Then at the end, she didn't never talk about what she was gonna do for the black community, but she had the nerve to get Beyonce and Jay-Z up there and throw us a concert 2 days before election. Like, girl, how is that gonna help us? We love Beyonce and Jay-Z, but how is that gonna help the black community? She called us super predators. Her husband sat up there. He signed a whole crime bill which locked up the most black men in history. I'm not about to, no. She got it. I wasn't gonna vote for her, period. She's so corrupt, like the Clintons, they corrupt. I would never support them.
And let me just say, as a feminist, I felt like Hillary Clinton's campaign very much was trying to profit off of this whole idea that she was going to be the first woman president. And if we look for her, who voted for her, it was largely women in their 60s. And I think it's because for those women, they saw this as the one opportunity for women to ever get to that higher office. Millennial women like me, we didn't vote for Hillary Clinton because I think that we see that the world's getting to a place where there's going to be a chance for a woman who might actually be good for the office, right?
She felt like she just owned the election. Like when her and Obama was going at it, they literally destroyed each other, and then they came out and they was like, oh, buddy. Oh, you think since, you know, you friends with Obama, I'm gonna vote for you because Obama black, and you know, we was down with Obama. Girl, boo, get up out of here. You got me messed up. Hillary Clinton tried to play me, and she wasn't, period.
So let me ask you a question. So like Loren and
Trump
Diamond,
didn't never play me, period. Everything Trump said that he was gonna do, he did it, period.
So a question
Everything.
for Loren and Diamond. What has been your experience with progressive women? Knowing that you voted for Trump.
You mean like once I came out as a Trump supporter, I got a lot of hate. I lost a lot of friends, a lot of family members. You know, I get called Uncle Tom, Coon. It don't even matter. Like,
Do you feel like you get it on both sides, both being black and a woman?
yeah, being black. They always be like, as a black woman. I'm just like, I'm a businesswoman. I want to own my own business. I want to be a billionaire.
The only time I've ever been attacked was by liberal women. So it's really ironic when you say, oh, conservatives or this and that, when I find that liberals are some of the most intolerant people. One of my friends got punched in the face at UC Berkeley just because he was tabling with a conservative organization. You see this happening all the time.
And vice versa.
I've never
People die for being people of color all the
people
time.
of color die, like literally
not punch
die.
in the face, but like
death. And I think when we're having this conversation about conservative, I think it's also like, as was uplifted, that how this country uplifts white supremacy. And there is a conversation about anti-blackness that we also must and get to have a conversation about that exists in this space.
I thought that we were talking about politics on being conservative or liberal, not colored.
But they're all intertwined. You can't divide them because we exist with all of those identities, not just as a woman, but a first-generation American woman or an immigrant woman of color. All of those are our identities.
So my next question is, how is abortion, pro-life, and pro-choice wrapped up into feminism? So that's one pack there.
I think for a lot of people, feminism, this wave of feminism has become synonymous with abortion. And so it's something where if you don't subscribe to abortion, then you don't belong in the feminist movement. And I think that that's where we're trying to create a space, because we follow something called the consistent life ethic, which means we oppose all forms of violence for the duration of someone's life. So we're anti-war, we're anti-death penalty, anti-torture. We extend it into the womb when human beings are at their weakest and most vulnerable by also being anti-abortion. So for me, this is actually a very progressive belief. More human rights for more human beings. And when I talk to people about this, you know, the common response I get is like, all right, I disagree with that, but I see where you're coming from. And so from there, I try to take it to a common ground perspective of, you know, if you're pro-choice, cool. Like legally you can have an abortion in this country, but let's talk about what these other choices are as well. And how can we support women who are facing unplanned pregnancies like I had when I was 16 years old? You know, what was the support and honestly the privilege I had to be able to choose life for my son, because so many women don't have that. And so by saying, oh, you know, abortion's pro-choice, for a lot of women it's not. It's the only choice. It's a necessary evil. And so I think that feminists have to come together and create space to have dialogue like this.
And I think personally, I very much agree, and I'm always kind of like, when folks say that they're pro-life, but then they don't give a shit about black people getting murdered in the streets, they don't care about black trans women having the life expectancy of 35 years old. I'm kind of like, where's this energy to be quote unquote pro-life, but the only life you care about is before, exactly.
Yeah.
So I feel like it has to be a more holistic approach, and I think that when you see feminism that has this one axis that only talks about abortion, like having gone to school in Louisiana, I knew kids who knew what abortion was before they knew what a pap smear was. And you should be able to talk about all of sexual health, not just, the most sensational elements of sexual health.
I mean, I have a lot of opinions about this because I am from Texas and I went to Catholic school. They would pass around the little fetuses, and yet I've always believed,
They would pass around fetuses?
the baby at different months, these little plastic. It was traumatizing. It was like at the different things. But 9 months in America, you're not, unless there's something wrong with you, you can't have an abortion at 9 months. This is not Asia. This is not one of those.
Have you not been paying attention to New York? What just happened?
Yes, you can. So this
And
is
in
the
Virginia.
There's also the Democrats voted against this Born Alive survivor. Basically, there was a bill that was proposed that would have criminalized not providing health care to a child that survives an abortion. And this is something that I felt like this is the logical conclusion of abortion is infanticide. When you decide to dehumanize a child and decide that its worth is based on its convenience in your life, and you have decided that once that child is born, and it survives a botched abortion, it's living and breathing, and it's not a criminal activity to deny it health care, take it to a hospital, that is hugely problem. I think that is reprehensible, and it is infanticide.
So from a medical context, when an abortion happens and they're, the fetus is otherwise viable, then you don't generally see just fetal tissue being discarded. It generally is like if the mother's life is in danger, if it's an ectopic pregnancy, but this is getting into like a lot of medical jargon, and I think that this particular bill was used to paint Democrats as baby killers, and that's a narrative we see a lot.
Margaret Sanger, she literally came up with Planned Parenthood to kill black people.
She's a eugenicist.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And what also confuses me about the women's movement, the feminist movement, is that we always be like, oh, the female is the future, but we killing them. What's gonna happen? What's gonna happen? I mean, I was raised up in a rough area. You was raised up with a single mom. What if your mom would have aborted you? You wouldn't be here to talk.
Right. I wouldn't be here to talk though either if I hadn't made it to higher education, if I hadn't made it to Columbia. And I'm pro-choice in every sense. I'm pro-choice in the sense that you should be able to choose your life path, that you should be able to go to college, that you should be able to have that dream job no matter where you're from. And if abortion is a part of that story, if birth control is a part of that story, if sex education is a part of that story.
I don't have a problem
Right?
with birth
That's what I want to work in as we make this conversation go
I don't have
a little
an
bit
issue
further.
with birth
I think we
control
should be
at all.
talking about birth
But abortion
control
isn't
and
birth
sex
control.
education
Yeah.
as well.
Abortion isn't birth control, and most people don't use abortion as birth control. But I think,
And most people wouldn't have abortions if they
I
had
think
access
that
to birth control.
we need to have OTC, not insurance, not going through, but we need OTC access to birth control, and No, over the counter, $5 for everybody. Not just for birth control, but for Plan B, which it's worth mentioning, people confuse it with the abortion drug. There is a pill that you can take that will induce an abortion. Plan B does not do that. What it does is it prevents. Plan B prevents a pregnancy from happening. Essentially, what it does is it prevents a fertilized egg from implanting. So you never become pregnant in the first place. And if you're already pregnant, it does not harm the baby. And this is huge. This is a big one. We have to culturally change what it means to be a young, poor, or single mother. As long as you're shaming women for being single moms, for being young moms, as long as we're treating people poorly, as long as we're holding them back, if they're not able to go to school, they're not able to get a job, they're not able to do all of these things, you're giving them an incentive for abortion when they get kicked out of church, they get kicked out of their homes. Like, that is the cause of most of what this is. I mean, a lot of the rest of it is just like someone who really wanted their baby finds out that they're being born without a brain or without a heart.
The feminist movement, unfortunately, is kind of pushing this narrative that you can't have your child and go to school. You can't have your child and, achieve this successful life. Like, I think my feminism's rooted in you can, and we're the sisterhood that's going to come around and support you.
As the daughter of a woman who went to college in the 70s, and like I'm from rural Texas. This man, when I was home recently, he was like, I want you to vote for me. I'll protect your rights to go hunting and fishing without a license anytime and no background checks. And my mom is 65, and she said, what about my right to abortion? And he said, I back the Bible, and she started chanting, my body, my choice, my body, my choice. But even then, it was like they were both yelling at each other. There was no conversation, and at least now I like that there's conversation, but I do think it's my body, my choice, and that the government should not be regulating it, because we're going to go around it anyway. Coat hangers, like horrific things.
Well, and that's the issue. It's supply and demand, right? So they're trying to cut off supply, but they're not addressing the demand side and why this is an issue. I think preventative care, I think sex education, like all of these things, every prevented potential pregnancy is a prevented potential abortion. So I am all for us actually addressing the demand side and freaking keep the Bible out of it. It's just basic science and biology at this point. Like, that's how we have the conversation.
So my next question, by show of hands, do you support the Me Too movement?
I used to.
Okay, and why did you use to?
Because I feel like the Me Too movement have been hijacked, honestly.
Say that once more.
It's been hijacked, honestly.
By whom?
By liberals. They took it to extreme. I went to a protest. It was believe all women. No, because my dad's a single dad. He have dated many women. What if a woman lied on my dad? Then I wouldn't have my dad to raise me, and I'd be in foster care or something. I understand. I'm a victim of molestation and stuff, so I understand that. I understand what you're going through. But to sit there and say, oh, believe all women, and just to demonize a man, I don't agree with that.
So let me add on to that. I think that the Me Too movement did a lot of good. But with that being said, I think the whole idea of believe all women unequivocally is also a problem, because, there are instances where women do lie, and, even an accusation can cause horrific damage towards an individual. It's damaging. So we need to be very careful how we go about this.
So I want to speak to that a little bit, because I very much do believe in due process, but I don't think that believe women, or when they say believe survivors, I don't think they mean believe them in the face of all evidence that points to the opposite. I think it's more like if someone comes and tells you, hey, my car got stolen, you don't tell them, prove to me that your car got stolen. There's no way I won't believe it until you can prove it. I think it's more you believe that their car was stolen, and then you investigate it as if it were stolen. And then if it suddenly appears that it wasn't stolen and they've had it at home in their garage the whole time, then you're like, hey, I don't believe you on this. Now you have to justify it, right?
I think that's a really accessible way to put it, right? We're trying to change the culture. It's about changing culture and like changing the assumptions that are ingrained in us.
So my next question, has work culture changed for the better because of Me Too?
I think yes and no.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think yes and no, because I think that it has made a lot more people empathetic to other people's issues, and I think that's a big part of it. I think, unfortunately, also it's created this sort of reactionaryism. We saw these stories of people who were saying like, oh, well, now I just won't invite women out to go to lunch with me, or I don't hire women because I think that this might be a risk, or stuff like that.
Now it's like, well, now I can't even be in a room alone with the, with the woman. And it's like, well, oftentimes being a woman in the workforce, you are already anticipating, I know I'm not going to be in a room by myself. Or if I am, going to make sure that it's like glass and that there's people present. And so I think that now you're seeing this cautiousness, perhaps for folks who have had the privilege of not having to think about, constantly, who are now considering this.
I think there are people who are predators, and there are people who misunderstood consent at some point in some way.
Because society incentivizes.
Right, exactly, because society does make it very easy to do that. And so I think we need to understand the difference between the two.
For me, I can't think of the Me Too movement and not have to face the fact that, like, okay, like these people are suffering major repercussions in their career, like Louis C.K., Harvey Weinstein, and I'm so glad, that's wonderful. But that I have to look at Trump and he said the grab the pussy thing. Like, I cannot get over that. I cannot get over
Trump said that in privacy.
That is the
He was
right,
no,
just like you and me.
no. This is free speech. You can say whatever you want to say.
That's fine.
You can say whatever you want to say. That was private, and he recorded him. He violated Trump. Trump can say whatever he want to say. Women talk nasty about men and their own privacy, and so can Trump.
I don't say that about men.
So
I don't say that I like to assault men.
Trump said groupies will literally let you. Have y'all never been around groupies? Because they do.
My grandmother used to
He
say
just
that
told the
integrity
truth.
is what happens in private, and if that I don't want a politician in the White, unfortunately that's the case, that does messed up fuck shit in private because it's in private.
Obama smoked weed.
That's okay with me. That's not the same as
Okay, if Obama you gotta hold everybody. You gotta hold everybody on the same line. If Obama can do that,
So that's
so can Trump. Trump can say whatever he want to say. Trump can say whatever he want to say.
So, I mean, I think the difference,
I'm just saying
is,
because weed is illegal in some places.
Yeah,
I'm just
absolutely,
saying.
because it's a
So if he can do
criminalized
that, if he
behavior
can do
with
that
no
and say that and do that, then so can he.
It's a criminalized behavior with
It's
no
not.
victim.
I think the language is reprehensible. I think
No,
the
no,
language
no.
is reprehensible. I agree. So I can agree with that. I also think that when we talk about when we talk about behavior of people, I think what happened with President Clinton and his intern is also a violation.
Right.
That was a power position.
Right.
That was a position that he abused. So I think there are a lot of men out there that make bad choices. And so I think the Me Too movement, what it's at least done is started a conversation or continued or amplified, amplified's a better word, amplified a conversation that we as women were already having, maybe, right? Yes?
And that pisses me off about Democrats is that they let Clinton slide, but then
and he was going to go back in the White House, okay? So he was going to be the first man, right? He was going to be the first man. So if we want to be real about this conversation, he was going to be the first man we've ever had in this country.
Right, but that would also be holding his wife accountable for
but
his
this
actions.
is exactly, but on
which is
women,
That's why I, as a feminist, couldn't vote for her because she was trying to suppress
silence.
minorities.
She tried to silence his accusers.
So
this
I mean, I agree with
but holding men to account for their
right, but
So
I
let me
agree
just
with
have
that.
her finish, and then we can move on to Deja, and then have another.
But you were you were saying it better than I was. But she did try to silence his accusers in a lot of different ways. And if we're going to talk about exactly.
Right,
If we're going to talk about the
it
importance of
continues.
the Me Too movement, we have to reckon with things that happened in the past that are probably uncomfortable. And I think that's been a big part of the Me Too movement. I do think there are excesses to the Me Too movement that you talked about very poignantly, which is sort of the backlash or the attitude that people have towards it. Do I think there's a possibility of people misunderstanding? I think that's that's been a big, significant chunk of it. I don't know the percentage, but I do think that there are a lot of men now that are wait, how do I behave now? What's the appropriate way to behave? And the hard part with that too is a lot of people meet their spouses at work. And so a lot of the behavior, a lot of the behavior that we engage in when we are dating with someone, it's hard because those boundaries get blurred at work so many times when people are just starting a relationship. So if we want to talk about the Me Too movement, I think we have to be really nuanced, but I also think we should talk about, what are the dynamics of dating and how do we navigate? I mean, this is kind of scary for men and women. How do we navigate how to date in the workplace?
Well, do you think
that's
that
a reality?
dating, that's actually a question that I wanted to bring up. Do you feel that Me Too has affected dating?
So I am friends with a lot of men, and they think that they're scared of dating. I don't. And when I talk to them, I'm like, can you please elaborate? And they're like, well, what happens if I had too much to drink and the girl had too much to drink and she wakes up the next morning? And because I've had discussions with a lot of females as well, and I had a conversation with one of my TAs in one of my classes, and what she said was absolutely terrifying. She said, if I had alcohol and the guy had alcohol and I wake up the next morning and I don't remember it, then that's rape. But it's like, but what happens if both of you guys are intoxicated during a night? Should you not have sex when you're drinking at all? Like, who should limit that? So I think that's a very serious discussion we should have with our partners. But a lot of men are terrified of taking a girl home who's had any amount of alcohol because he doesn't want to get accused of sexual assault.
I think
Well,
it's better
join
to
the
be
club,
worried
'cause,
about that than to do it and not worry
Exactly.
about it.
I agree.
Also,
I agree. Yeah.
join the club. Like, girls and women and femmes have been terrified to go on dates and go home
go
and
drink.
drink forever. So join the club. Like, let's all get on it together and fix it because it's on all of us.
I think that, like, so as a person who like isn't engaging only with straight people, like, so my partner and I, we were together prior to the Me Too movement, but like in our own daily like activities, like we started asking each other like, can I kiss you? And like are more vocal during sex. And I think that's like better. Oh, by the way, I'm Muslim and I have sex. That's going to be a big thing. But I can't wait for that backlash tweets. But anyway, I think that, you know, as far as looking at like sexual relationships, looking at intimacy and looking at dating, like just conversations about consent and being more affirmative about consent and having more conversations, like whether that's like, hey, I take medication, or hey, like this is like I'm on birth control or I'm not, or like when was the last time you were tested? I think all of that has to be a larger conversation, and I'm seeing that within the queer community happen a lot more as Me Too is happening, but also because, you know, we have to deal with more of this, and because, you know, like health outcomes, for example. So I'm seeing a lot. I don't know about the straights though. It sounds pretty rough.
I'll talk about the straights and the whites and the other things. But I mean, I'm from such a like conservative rural area where I was always told like being a flirt means you have a good personality. I'm supposed to let people hug me, or I'm being really rude. And for me, this idea of consent and young girls saying, actually, I don't want to hug, I'm so like, that is radical to me because I was taught you're being rude to this person. And so consent is parallel to boundaries for me.
Right, for my next question, by a show of hands, are trans women helping push forward women's movement and gender
Oh, I
equality?
want to hear this.
Like what?
Okay. So why?
So we wouldn't have the LGBTQ rights movement if it wasn't for Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson.
Come on, you better know your
Okay,
history.
right? Okay. I'm a historian. Let's go. No, but for real, like if we didn't have, we would still be in this idea of, you know, gay, you know, cisgender white men saying we are just like you except we are gay, and we would not have marriage equality today if it wasn't for Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson pushing the envelope and saying no. We're saying no to police brutality. We're saying no to respectability. We're saying no to this idea that we have to fit into your straight box and then just check the gay box or check the trans box and still be okay. And so you continue to see, like, even though that you know, we wouldn't have the advancements in the women's liberation movement if we hadn't had this conversation about LGBTQ rights movement happening simultaneously.
I think as a trans woman on this panel, I often experience that women feel that trans women are not supporting us. It's like, well, trans women often get pushed to the corner, like we don't want you in our spaces, but yet we stand and fight. Even with, like, as trans women of color, we started and supported the Black Lives Matter movement, and then oftentimes we still see Black trans women being murdered, and there's no conversation around it.
For the people that disagreed, would you like to make a
I
statement?
sort of disagree. I thought people didn't raise their hand.
No statement?
You know, I think it's interesting though, right? Because when you have to, you didn't raise your hand, which was passive, but when you have to actively deny someone like their humanity, their agency to their face, it's really something different.
I'm not denying anything. I don't have that much knowledge on it, so I'm listening and I'm learning.
Exactly.
That's beautiful.
All right, perfect. So, do traditional gender roles have a place in society?
Yes.
Sure, I think as long as they're voluntary, I think as long as people actually want that and we're in a situation where they're actually able to make those choices for themselves on an individual level, I think it's fine. The problem is when people are forced into it.
And I've also seen a lot of shaming from like radical liberal, like feminists who shame stay-at-home moms. It's not my kind of lifestyle. I want to work, but why are we shaming women who don't want to work and who want to raise their kids? There's nothing shameful about that.
Ariel,
I
did you
agree,
have
but I
anything
think
to
people
add to
also
that?
shame men who want to stay home and raise their kids.
No, I agree.
too.
I agree.
I think that there is inherent value in traditional gender roles, and there are certain occupations that are more suited to, like, I'm thinking about, there are certain time, like for construction, for instance, right? When we talk about this inequity in gender role, in gender distribution in certain industries like construction, I don't necessarily think the answer is we go into the construction industry and say, okay, we need 50% women and 50% men, because I do think that there are certain gender differences that sort of make women at least gravitate towards a certain field, and not because there's a cultural pressure, but because there's an innate desire to be there.
I disagree slightly because I feel like gender role as it exists currently is also tied to binary. Right, so again, like my experience is different, and I see trans folks who operate differently, and in school, like, so I feel like gender roles has this patriarchal kind of system of how if you're mass presenting, you automatically fall under operating masculine, and if you're femme presenting, you automatically have to fit into the role of how feminine and women operate, which I think is hindering on just, again, the intimacy and what can actually be possible to create. So slightly disagree.
My next question, are there ways in which women are privileged in our society as opposed to men?
Yes.
How so?
Like I mentioned before, the draft. Women don't have to sign up for the draft. Women are more likely to win custody battles just because they're a woman. And women are more likely to be believed during sexual assault. There's just a lot of instances where women have privileges over men.
And we get free drinks.
Yeah, we do. But there are informal ways in which women are advantaged. I think we're forgiven for certain things a little bit easier. I think that when it comes to like getting a parking ticket or getting a speeding ticket or having something paid for at the bar, like you said.
Crimes.
Yeah, actual crimes. But there are things I think that women are sort of, again, there's like this forgiving attitude towards women, and I think that does, play into this. It does become a sort of privilege, an informal privilege.
I think when we're talking about those like cultural privileges, that they don't apply to all women. Like that is white women have a lot of those privileges, whereas brown and black women are not getting those same privileges. We're not experiencing that. And I think white women have a lot of privilege over a lot of men of color too. Rich white women over like the poor men of color from my neighborhood. The privilege difference is enormous.
Even not rich. I mean, I grew up without money,
Right.
but because I look like this, I got away with a lot. Like,
And the interesting thing too is like how assumptions about gender can influence too. So like because I wear a hijab, I'm read as Arab, but when I'm read as, when I have my like little fro out and I'm like read as black, then I don't have that same like grace that a woman is granted. So I'm read as demure and quiet, but when I'm read as black, I'm read as angry and violent and masculine. But when you look at me being read as a Muslim woman, I feel like I can get away with more like in a professional space because, she's speaking up, she's being brave. And it's like, no, I'm just loud, but it's assumed that I'm not going to be. And then that is given like a token of, wow, good on you.
Which is come back to like when you ask these questions, I often say it's to whom you're asking them, because we have multiple identities and multiple experiences. So of course, you're going to say yes and you're going to bring up the draft, and of course I'm going to say no because that's not my experience of privilege. Like it's not my existence.
I also think it's worth mentioning, like all of these things that you brought up, but I think that, or even the drinks thing, right? Like the free drinks, ladies' night, all of that. All of these actually, like they're sort of viewed as criticisms of feminism, or this idea that like, women aren't always at the disadvantaged position, sometimes men are. And I think that's true, but that's the thing, like that's all part of what the patriarchy is. It's not about men versus women or anything like that. It's about the structure that's kind of pitting us against each other.
the military thing is so interesting to me from our Jewish friends, because I have always been, my ex is Jewish, and when I found out his grandmother fought with will you help me say it's the Haganah, what is it? Like the Israeli army. I have family in the military, and I was always like, that is so cool. Like I've always had this like fantasy. I'm a lover, not a fighter, but like that was never like an option really pushed to me. And I know so many women who, one of my good friends, she was one of the first women in the Navy. And it is amazing, but it's like that's a privilege that women have fought for. So this idea that that's an inherent privilege to not, or like to not be drafted is weird to me.
Yeah, I'd rather no one gets drafted, to be honest.
Yeah.
I mean, this is great. I love having this conversation. I like hearing all these perspectives, because I think most people really want to build a better world, and we're just in disagreement about how to do that. And we don't get this opportunity to talk and to understand where we're all coming from. And I think when we do, it makes us all stronger.
And that's where the creative solutions come from. When we come together, we can find common ground solutions creatively.
Awesome. Thank you, ladies. This is amazing. You ladies are so amazing. You're smart. You're beautiful, beautiful souls. And I'm so honored to be in your presence right now.
Thank you.
Now, who wants to get drinks?
I gotta work again after this.
It was weird how like civil everyone was. That's like so different. What? I'm like freaked out about it. I'm like, what?